the Vice President of the United States told the world that the first Iranian peace proposal was probably written by ChatGPT and thrown in the garbage. An AI wrote a ceasefire proposal for a war started by humans, and the humans rejected it. If that isn't the defining metaphor of 2026, nothing is. The proposals. J.D. Vance revealed that Iran submitted 3 different versions of its 10-point proposal. The first, he said, was probably written by ChatGPT and immediately went in the garbage.
Good morning, everybody, and here we go. 9 o'clock in New York City, the fragile peace, the U.S. and Iran ceasefire holding for now, but the pressure is coming from all sides. This before the Vice President, J.D. Vance, leads high-stakes talk over the weekend. Good morning, everybody. We've got a ton to get through. I'm Bill Hemmer. Buckle up. Here we go today.
Good morning. I'm Dana Perino. I'm surprised it is only Thursday because it feels like it could be next Thursday. There's been a lot of news, but we are here on America's Newsroom. We're going to take you through it. So these negotiations we mentioned, they're going to take place in Pakistan, and the goal is a diplomatic path forward. Their success or failure could hinge on the Strait of Hormuz. That's the key waterway that's still closed. Meanwhile, President Trump warning that U.S. forces are ready to resume their devastating strikes unless the regime complies with a deal.
So here was the post from late last night. Here we go. It's a long one. All U.S. ships, aircraft, and military personnel with additional ammunition, weaponry, and anything else that is appropriate and necessary for the lethal prosecution and destruction of an already substantially degraded enemy will remain in place in and around Iran until such time as the real agreement reached is fully complied with. If for any reason it is not, which is highly unlikely, then the shooting starts bigger and better and stronger than anyone has ever seen before.
So let's get to it. Trey Ying standing by in Tel Aviv. Let's check in at the White House first. That's Peter Doocy's spot. Hi, Peter.
Dana, good morning. One of the first things that made officials here suspicious of that first Iranian peace proposal was that to folks in the West Wing, it looked like something churned out by AI.
The first 10-point proposal was something that was submitted, and we think, frankly, was probably written by ChatGPT, that was submitted to Steve Witkoff and Jared Kushner. That immediately went in the garbage and was rejected. There was a second 10-point proposal that was much more reasonable.
That's where we're at. Vance is now on deck for his biggest assignment as vice president so far, leading these peace talks in Pakistan Saturday. President Trump will be watching from the U.S., where he is still stewing about military allies who left us hanging during epic fury. The president writes, NATO wasn't there when we needed them, and they won't be there if we need them again. Remember Greenland, that big, poorly run piece of ice. The man NATO sent to try to keep the U.S. invested in the alliance, Mark Rutte, now talking about his private chat with the president yesterday.
He is clearly disappointed with many NATO allies, and I can see his point. But at the same time, I was also able to point to the fact that the large majority of European nations has been helpful with basing, with logistics, with overflights.
Some of the words that officials here are using to describe epic fury are in the past tense, like an operation that has already met its military objectives. But President Trump still is not going to pull any manpower out of the Middle East until a peace deal is reached or not. Dana?
Okay, Peter, that's still up in the air. Thank you so much. And now let's go to Trey Ying. He has the latest from Tel Aviv. Hi, Trey.
Yeah, Dana, good morning. We just got a new statement from CENTCOM Commander Admiral Brad Cooper, who said Iran suffered a generational defeat, adding the U.S. military achieved all of its objectives. Here's what Cooper had to say.
U.S. forces have paused offensive operations in accordance with the ongoing ceasefire. However, we remain present. We remain vigilant, and we remain ready if called.
We remain vigilant, the words there from the CENTCOM commander, as we do have a new statement from Iran's president, Masoud Pezeshkian, who said the repeated aggression by the Zionist entity against Lebanon is a flagrant violation of the initial ceasefire agreement and a dangerous indicator of deceit and lack of commitment to potential accords. The coordination of these aggressions will render negotiations meaningless. Our hands will remain on the trigger, and Iran will never abandon its Lebanese brothers and sisters. Now, the Israelis yesterday conducted dozens of airstrikes against Iran's Iran's largest proxy in the region, Hezbollah. You can see some of these strikes here in the Lebanese capital of Beirut, specifically the Dakhya neighborhood. The IDF says they took out a top Hezbollah official identified as the personal secretary to Hezbollah's Secretary General Naim Qassem. Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu saying this yesterday about the operation's goals.
We have more goals to complete, and we will achieve them either by agreement or by renewing the fighting. We are prepared to return to fighting at any moment necessary. Our finger is on the trigger.
Israel preparing for a variety of contingencies in the days ahead as international attention remains on the Strait of Hormuz. Yesterday, 4 different vessels were able to pass through this area. According to initial reports, these were not oil tankers, but container ships. Today, there are questions about how many vessels will be able to get through, as Vice President J.D. Vance issued a new warning last night to the Iranian regime.
I encourage the Iranians to come to the table seriously. We've seen some signs that they're going to do that. We've seen some signs of bravado. Fundamentally, we're in a good spot. They're reopening the straits. We have a ceasefire. And frankly, if they break their end of the bargain, then they're going to see some serious consequences.
The Vice President speaking very clearly there about the negotiations that are set to take place this weekend in Islamabad, Pakistan. He'll be joined by Special Envoys Steve Witkoff and Jared Kushner. Bill, Dana?
Trey Yings, thank you. And now let's get to Bill over at the board.
Okay, we're going to explain a few things, Dana. I want our audience to think about 4 or 5 things on this first map here. Number 1, the country of Oman, and then UAE, and then Iran over here. And in between this area is the Strait of Hormuz. Okay, so that's the balance that we look at right now. This is what we believed happened in the Strait of Hormuz over the past 24 hours. April 7th to April 8th. Today's the 9th of April. I count 10, maybe 11 cargo ships and tankers that have gone through the Strait of Hormuz. And what you see in green are those entering the Strait of Hormuz. What you see in yellow is those exiting. On a normal day, before this war started, some 40 days ago, you would have 100 ocean liners going through the Strait of Hormuz. Remember, 24-hour period, it's 9, maybe 10 over that 2-day period, April 7 and April 8, all right? Here is the old track, all right, from the Gulf of Oman, right, off the coast of Oman. Iran is over here, and then in turn, the tankers would come this way as well. What Iran is doing right now is they're diverting these ships to come closer to its shoreline. We talk a lot about these islands that Iran has that owns right now. That's like Larak Island. This is Kamesh over here, a larger island. So what the Iranians are doing is they're diverting traffic this way so they can hopefully, they believe, at least they say it publicly, collect that toll in either cryptocurrency or Chinese yuan. That's the strategy on behalf of the Iranians today. We're going to watch that throughout the day and see whether or not that traffic picks up April 9th, April 10th, into the weekend when J.D. Vance and others are in Islamabad. This is what the Israelis did in the meantime, and this is a really good question as to what the Israelis thought this ceasefire was all about, what the Iranians thought it was about, and what the U.S. thought it was about. Everything you see in blue is a strike that the Israelis hit with this Hezbollah targets on the ground in Lebanon. By some reporting now, they went after 100 targets in a 24-hour period. Be sure to like and subscribe for all the Fox News latest on YouTube and catch full shows streaming now on Fox 1.
It was passed to Witkoff and Kushner, who rejected it outright. A second, more reasonable version was based on actual back and forth between the U.S., Pakistan, and Iran. This is the one Trump described as workable. The negotiators Iran doesn't want. There's a devastating backstory the Fox segment didn't mention. Iranian sources said weeks ago that they refused to sit down with Witkoff or Kushner, who led the nuclear negotiations before the war. Iran suggested Trump send Vance instead. The Arms Control Association published a damning analysis concluding that Witkoff did not have sufficient technical expertise or diplomatic experience to engage in effective diplomacy, and that his mischaracterization of Iran's positions and nuclear program likely informed Trump's assessment that talks were not progressing. The U.S. lead negotiators were rejected by Iran, assessed as incompetent by arms control experts, and the proposal they received first was allegedly generated by artificial intelligence. And this is the diplomatic apparatus on which the fate of 88 million people and the global energy market now rests. The Strait, again, Iran closed the Strait of Hormuz again within hours of opening it, citing Israeli strikes on Lebanon. The ceasefire may formalize a system of charging fees in the strait, with both Iran and Oman collecting tolls, using the revenue for reconstruction. This would upend decades of precedent treating the strait as a free international waterway. Bill Hemmer, to his credit, did the most useful piece of visual journalism on any network this morning, mapping the actual ship traffic through the strait over the past 48 hours. His count, roughly 10 to 11 vessels passed through in 24 hours. Normal daily traffic before the war, 100-plus tankers. And those 10 ships were diverted closer to the Iranian coastline, past Iranian-controlled islands, where Tehran can collect tolls in cryptocurrency or Chinese yuan. The strait isn't open, it's a checkpoint. The White House correspondent dropped what may be the most consequential detail of the day, almost casually. A senior administration official described Iran's first ceasefire proposal as something churned out by AI that immediately went in the garbage. White House Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt reinforced it was fundamentally unserious, unacceptable, and completely discarded. It was literally thrown in the garbage by President Trump and his negotiating team. This raises a question nobody asked. If the first proposal was AI-generated nonsense, and the second was the basis for a ceasefire announced hours before the president was going to bomb every power plant in Iran, how much genuine diplomacy actually occurred? Was the ceasefire a negotiated outcome, or was it a last-second off-ramp that both sides grabbed because the alternative was catastrophe? Vance suggested that fringe elements in Iran were leaking things because they did not like the fact that negotiations were happening. If true, this means the ceasefire was opposed by factions within Iran's own power structure, the same structure that is supposed to implement it. The ceasefire's single biggest vulnerability isn't the strait. It isn't the uranium. It's Lebanon. Vance said, if Iran wants to let this negotiation fall apart over Lebanon, which has nothing to do with them, and which the United States never once said was part of the ceasefire, that's ultimately their choice. Iran's position is the opposite. Iran's president said Israeli attacks on Lebanon are a flagrant violation of the initial ceasefire agreement, and that Iran will never abandon its Lebanese brothers and sisters. These aren't negotiating positions. They are incompatible realities. The U.S. says Lebanon isn't part of the deal. Iran says it is. Israel is bombing Lebanon harder than at any point since the war began. At least 112 people were killed in Lebanon on the first day of the ceasefire, one of the deadliest days in the entire conflict. If Iran pulls out of the ceasefire over Lebanon, and its military has explicitly said it might, then the strait closes, the bombs resume, and we're back to a whole civilization will die tonight. Except this time, there may not be a phone call from Pakistan to stop it. What? Trey Yingst reported that nobody followed up on from Tel Aviv. Yingst delivered a line from CENTCOM Commander Admiral Brad Cooper. Iran suffered a generational defeat. He also reported that 4 vessels, container ships, not oil tankers, passed through the strait yesterday. Not 100, 4. And then this, from the Israeli perspective. The number one priority for the Israeli military and government is the enriched uranium. If the enriched uranium remains in the country, Iran could be another North Korea. Trump's Truth Social post this morning said the U.S. will dig up and remove all of the deeply buried nuclear dust. Last week, in his primetime address, he said it would take months, and surveillance was sufficient. Now he's back to physical removal. Nobody on Fox News noted this reversal. It matters enormously. If the Islamabad talks are expected to address physical removal of the uranium, something that would require a ground operation that experts say would be the most complex special forces mission in American history, then 2 weeks of diplomacy isn't remotely sufficient to plan, negotiate, and execute it. The president posted at midnight that all U.S. military assets would remain in place until such time as the real agreement reached is fully complied with. If for any reason it is not, which is highly unlikely, then the shooting starts. Bigger and better and stronger than anyone has ever seen before. This isn't the language of a man who believes the war is over. It's the language of someone holding a gun to a table during a poker game. The ceasefire is not a peace agreement. It is a breathing pause enforced by the explicit threat of resumption. Joint Chiefs Chairman General Dan Kane defined the ceasefire as a pause and stressed the U.S. military is ready to resume combat. We will be hanging around to make sure Iran complies. We are prepared to restart at a moment's notice, Hegseth said. Iran sent the identical message. We are with our hand on the trigger, ready to respond to any attack with more force. Both sides have their fingers on the trigger. Both claim victory. Both describe the ceasefire as a pause. And a vice president who called Iran's first peace proposal chatbot-generated spam is about to fly to Islamabad to negotiate the most consequential diplomatic agreement of the 21st century. Vance will lead the U.S. delegation alongside Witkoff and Kushner. Negotiations begin Saturday. A White House official told News Nation there is an updated plan and that Iran has already conceded to many of the old points. Iran's version, no concessions. Their demands, sanctions relief, U.S. withdrawal, straight sovereignty, damages, remain unchanged. The gap is planetary. The timeline is 2 weeks. The ceasefire is already cracking. The Strait is a checkpoint, not an open waterway. Lebanon is on fire. And somewhere in a government office in Tehran, someone may or may not be opening ChatGPT to draft the next proposal. This is where we are. 41 days, thousands dead, a global economy shaken, an alliance fractured, and the hope for peace resting on a weekend meeting in Pakistan between a vice president who thinks the other side's proposals are AI-generated and negotiators the other side refuse to talk to. Good luck to everyone involved. The world is watching, and it needs this to work more than anyone in that room may realize.